And now, the survival show that once survived the debate of Stratocaster versus Telecaster. In this episode, author Jeff Motes drops by. He's going to share with us how he crafted his Once Upon an Apocalypse series just for you. Howdy and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 279. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Jeff, welcome to In the Rabbit Hole.
Good morning. Thank you.
Man,
glad to be here.
It's always fun to have another Southern on the show. We're gonna have a good time today. So you are the author of Once Upon an Apocalypse, which, dude, seriously, I love that title. That is, I can't believe that wasn't taken. Good for you, man. I love the juxtaposition there.
Well, actually, there is another book by that title, but it's a horror book. So
oh, okay.
You won't get mixed up. You know?
Good to know. Good to know. Well, hey, man, before we dive into the book, let's get to know you a little bit better. Well, let's start with writing. That's usually the best place to go. How did you come to writing? Is this something you've done your whole life? Or is this just like, hey, I got a cool idea for a book and I've always had an itch to write a book, so let me do this. Which way did that pan out for you?
Well, I'm a engineer by training, an engineer and an electrician, and I'm an author by accident. I hadn't even planned on writing a book when I started this project. I was on Facebook talking to some family and friends about being prepared for difficult times. They had a lot of questions, and I was trying to throw out some scenario-based questions for them, and the response was pretty good. And I said, well, I don't like telling people what to do. I don't like telling people what I'm doing. I'm just going to tell a story and try to put the person who's reading it inside the story. And so I did. I just was going to write a few days on Facebook, but I got such a big response and so many questions that I started answering the questions inside the story. And I started providing information inside the story. So actually, my whole first book was written on Facebook.
Oh, wow. That's really neat.
Yeah, that was interesting. I wasn't writing a book. I was just trying to help family and friends. And next thing I know, I wrote 100 straight days and I had book one.
Wow. That's really neat. I've heard similar stories, but not in this particular genre. So that's really neat. What so do you have a history at all with writing, as far as like, do you have an author that, whether it's preparedness or not, or any of these things, just in general, an author that you like, that inspires you?
Well, Pat Frank was one of the first post-apocalyptic authors that I read. That's back in 1977. And also Chris Weatherman, A American, with his Going Home series. Those were some great books, meant a lot to me. But I really wasn't planning on writing. I'm an engineer, and we're very fortunate if we can spell our names.
Yes.
So I was really surprised that as I started writing, that I was getting the response that I was getting. But I was trying to write in a personable way to where the readers could relate to the characters. But I was trying to write to family and friends initially, and it just happened. It happened.
Yeah. So are there any books outside of preparedness that you're like, I love this book, this was the book that I read as a kid, or anything like that? Or is it just always preparedness for you?
Well, no. I used to read a lot of Westerns, Louis L'Amour.
Oh, yeah.
And Edgar Rice Burroughs, and, many of the classics, Swiss Family Robinsons. Those were all kind of preparedness type books, too, if you think about it. People struggling to survive, struggling through odds. So I've always had an interest in people trying to overcome difficulties in their lives and inside the story. So that meant a lot.
So who would you compare your writing style to?
In some ways, it's kind of unique in that my story has multiple characters, but it's completely told in the first person.
Okay.
Each character's point of view, which is a little different. Some people don't care for it that much, but I'm trying to put the readers inside the character's mind where they can understand why they're doing the things they're doing and how they're feeling as the events unfold. So the point of view changes depending on which character you're getting.
Interesting. So to go back for a second to where you began with this, writing on Facebook to answer the questions of family and friends, why, like, I don't think most people would immediately go to, let me just tell them a story. So get us into that a little bit. What gave you the idea? Like, you know what, I'm not going to just give them I'm going to write a story here, and hopefully that conveys the message.
Well, I threw out a question on Facebook, and the question was EMP. Anybody got a clue? That's the exact question. And I had people responding, and out of several dozen people answering, only one person even knew what it was. So I tried to explain to them what it was, and I said, "All right, now you're on the side of the car in Birmingham, where actually this story starts off at, and you live in South Alabama. What are you going to do? You know, your car stops, you get out, and what you have in your car is what you got, and now you got to get home." So the story started from that, and it just, the questions started coming, and people had an interest in it. So I just kept writing and trying to explain why you would want to have certain things, or what would happen to you if you didn't have certain things. And the whole story is built around that, especially the first book, trying to provide information that would help people prepare for widespread tragedy, such as the EMP. So that's how it started. It's just, it's trying to help folks think about being prepared.
Okay. So it just kind of naturally started off as a story by you posing questions, and kind of getting people to think. And I think that's a really interesting way of doing it, as far as just speaking to family and friends, of doing the what if game.
Yeah, it was, and I'm serious. It just happened. It's interesting because I wasn't writing a book. I wasn't planning. I mean, I only thought this was going to be a 1 or 2 post thing on Facebook. People being asking questions about it, and then I decided to develop some characters in it. But it's an interesting story in it, and that was the whole purpose, was try to get people to think about being prepared. And the first book was kind of interactive. People were talking. I was writing every day. I was writing, posting on Facebook. People were talking about it, and that's kind of how it developed.
That's really neat, because usually I ask the people if they're trying to just tell a great story that happens to be in a genre that they love and are passionate about, or if they're that has some lessons mixed into it, or if they're trying to teach lessons, and the best way to do that is to wrap a story around those lessons. And it's interesting because usually it's just, I'm trying to tell this story. I like this thing. And along the way, I get to share some survival lessons. And yours is the total opposite, which is really refreshing and neat, because you're like, no, I'm really trying to teach something here. And the best way to do that, and the way that people latched onto, was to tell it through story. It's just the oldest way of communicating information as far as humanity knows. So that's really neat. Walk us into the books. So how did we kind of heard how the Facebook part of it started. How did the book start?
I was probably about 2 months into it. I had a lot of people say, "Oh, you ought to turn this into a book. You ought to turn this into a book." Well, I'm an engineer. I can't write. And I was writing on Facebook, and it was all full of errors. It was hilarious sometimes. And sometimes I'd actually be writing it on my phone, sitting at Subway.
Oh, fun.
Putting it out. So I guess when I got toward the end, that's when I thought, well, maybe this is a book. Maybe this is something that I could publish and reach a larger number of people. Kind of way it went. And I didn't really have any help with my first book. I made a lot of mistakes. But then as I was writing my second book, I had a guy who was a retired publisher contact me about it. We talked a good while, and he pointed me in the right direction. So I rewrote my first book, redid the way I was doing the second book. Because originally I wrote everything in the second person.
Okay.
It's really weird, but I didn't know any better. It was kind of well received and not well received. But after talking with the publisher, I went first person and new editor, and my very first book's not available anymore.
That's how it goes sometimes. How does the story itself start? Like, walk us into the book. How does that? Where do we open it up to page 1? How does this begin?
Okay, you got a single mom
Okay.
out of town, attending a meeting in Birmingham. An EMP goes off. Her car goes down. All the infrastructure goes down, and she's got to get home to her daughter, who's 175 miles away. That's where it starts, right there on the side of an interstate, and her trying to figure out when her car goes down, what's going on, and then what is she going to do. And it starts with her, and it starts also with a bank vice president who's in a similar situation, except he's coming home from Atlanta, and then a contractor who's in another place in Alabama trying to get home. So the stories, they start off separately, and some of them converge together, and then they end up being a single story. And I'm trying to present 3 different characters with 3 different mindsets and 3 different levels of preparedness, and allow the reader to see, how the outcome might be based on those things.
Okay. Why an EMP? Why in particular that? Why does the books focus on that so much?
Well, an EMP, I think, is probably the worst case scenario in a lot of ways. And so I went straight for that. If you prepare for an EMP, you're prepared probably for most other things. So that's the reason I went with that. And with the car stopping and then you having to get home. I mean, I've gone to Mobile with people before, and a lot of time, and I'm in Jackson, so Mobile is about 60 miles south of where I am. And they'll go on a pair of flip-flops and nothing else. I keep thinking, what are you going to do if your car goes down? I mean, what if transportation stops? How are you going to get home? You're not coming home in a pair of flip-flops. That's the reason I did the EMPs. Really, it's kind of a worst-case scenario.
Yeah. So would you say EMP as far as your own personal stuff, is that the thing that you prepare for, the thing that gives you the most pause, the most cause for concern?
Well, I think that's probably the worst case scenario, but it's not the only thing.
Right.
I mean, if you think about threats to your family, and this is the way I like to do it. I mean, think about the bad things that could happen to you and your family. Think about how likely those things are to happen, and then what are the consequences of those things. Once you consider those 3 things, then you try to make a plan based on your own situation and your resources. I mean, if you're thinking about preparing yourself for difficult times, there's, perhaps one of the worst things or most common things is you lose your job. So you need to prepare for that. That's probably not the worst thing that could happen to you. An EMP would probably be the worst thing, but
working with probabilities, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If it was to happen, the likelihood is a lot lower. You're much more likely to lose your job than you are to get, have an EMP event. So you've got a whole spectrum of things you need to prepare for.
Yeah.
And I talk about a little bit about some of that in the book, as part of the story.
That makes sense. How much research did you end up having to do around EMPs to write the book? I mean, you already have the academic and practical knowledge of understanding electricity and electromagnetic interference in general, but how much extra research did you have to do on the topic?
I had to do a little. I didn't have to do a lot of extra because I've been studying this for some type of preparedness for probably 40 years. And some of it I had to do some research, check some facts. There's a wide range of thought by experts on an EMP.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert on EMP. I'm an engineer, but I'm not an expert on an EMP. But I have studied some people who are experts. And I think you had one on your show not long ago. Dr. Arthur Bradley. And then there's Jerry Emanuelson. I'm not going to say, I guess, a long lost relative after I wrote the book, who's actually a doctor, Dr. Andy Motes, who's done a lot of EMP research.
Oh, interesting. How fun.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I didn't know him until after I wrote the books, and he got on trying to do some searching down some family. But he was in the Air Force and did a lot of research for them. some people think it's going to be really bad. Some think it's not going to be quite as bad. So I can't tell you how bad it's going to be. I just chose a certain scenario for the book.
Yeah, it's a good scenario for a book. I mean, it does pose so many questions and so much. I mean, life without all of our gadgets or with most of our gadgets impaired, at least, would be very trying. When you were crafting the characters, where did you get your inspiration? Did you just kind of say, I need these kind of characters to put together this book, to tell the story I want to tell, the way I want to tell it? Or were you trying to speak to specific people in your life?
Well, most of the people that were responding to my initial things on Facebook were women.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
Female friends of mine. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted a strong female character. And that's how it started. Now, she wasn't completely prepared. She was kind of in the middle type prepared person. And then I also wanted a character that was somewhat prepared. I mean, not prepared at all, really, because I want to use him as a character study, a successful business person, to try to make the point that success in business life doesn't necessarily translate to a person prepared for difficult times. And then my third character, John, he's the guy that's really been thinking about things. He's a mix of characters that I've read in a lot of books. If you've read Louis L'Amour, you'll probably see some of that in him. That's how I come up with the characters.
That makes sense. That's pretty neat. Did writing these books, I mean, you end up spending so much time when you're writing any of this fiction in what can be such a dark headspace, and also perhaps having to look at things that, even though you've been doing it for a long time, you had to look at them in new ways, or really spend time, maybe also spend time thinking about things you hadn't really thought about deeply before. Did writing these books change your own preparedness, mindset, or journey in any way?
Yes, it did, actually. Okay. Made me think more, because I tried to put myself, as I was writing, I tried to put myself in the shoes of these characters, what they were thinking and what they were going through. Mm-hmm. And as I really thought things through, I need to change some things myself. I think it's helped me be a better prepared person.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Good stuff. Quick lightning round, just some fun questions. What would you say is your prepper pet peeve? I can never quite get that out right. Prepper pet peeve. What would you say? Something in the community that you see often, maybe from newbies, maybe even from some old timers, that just drives you crazy.
Too many preppers think they're experts.
Yeah,
I will admit, I'm an electrical engineer and a master electrician, and I'm not an expert on EMPs. Mm-hmm. I study from experts. I think too many people think they're experts, and they'll say things that you think, you might be right, but you might be wrong. So you ought not say it like you're definitely right.
Yeah.
That's probably my biggest thing.
There are a lot of armchair warriors out there. What would you say is the best $100 you've ever spent in preparedness?
Buying books.
I like that one.
Going to training classes. Mm-hmm. So I think there's 3 aspects to a person being prepared: spiritual, mental, and physical. And they're all 3 very important. Mm-hmm. Mental is a big thing. Spiritual is something personal for each person. They've got to work out on their own. Mental stuff, you can get the knowledge if you invest the time and the money into getting it. And the same thing in the physical aspects as well. But yeah, knowledge is a big thing.
Yeah, definitely. And it weighs nothing.
It weighs nothing, but it's a useful tool.
Yeah. So poop hits the fan tomorrow. What is your long gun of choice? Are you an AR, an AK, or something exotic and saucy?
No, just a regular AR.
Good deal. So now you're on book 3. How long do you intend to keep the series going? Do you have more books coming out?
Well, I'm working on a 4th book.
Oh, great.
Because the first 3 books only cover 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to tell the story of a certain family as they're struggling. I'm going to continue on with that family and the community they're in, at least through book 4. We'll see. We'll just see how it flows.
Very cool. And when is that 4th book going to come out?
It should be sometime after the first of the year. I had hoped to get it sooner, but I'm running way behind.
Yeah.
I have a day job too. So.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Do you have intentions of taking it even beyond that 4th book?
Well, we'll see. We'll just see. I'll just have to see how it flows. If it feels good, I'll keep on with it, because what I'm going to try to do with the 4th book, and if it goes into a 5th, that would be good too, is show a community surviving and recovering after such an event. The first 3 books they got home. Now that they're home, what's going to happen? How do they survive?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm wanting to do.
Good. I like it. So someone goes out, they buy your books, they listen to this episode, they go, this Jeff Motes guy, he is my brand of wacky. How do they connect with you? How do they keep up with all things going on and get more from you?
Well, the best place is on Facebook. If they'll search for Jeff Motes on Facebook, that would be the best way. There's a few, there's several Jeff Moteses on there, but I think you'll be able to pick it out.
Yeah. I'll also link to it in today's show notes. So yeah, good deal.
And the book has a Facebook page as well. So
okay.
And I will post things on there. I do book giveaways from time to time, and people talk about different situations there. So there's a lot of good information on there as well.
Well, fantastic. Well, Jeff, it was really fun talking to you today, and I wish you the best of the luck with the rest of your series.
Okay. Well, thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Show notes, links to Jeff's books, and other saucy resources can be found by going to intherabbithole.com/E279. If you're watching this on YouTube, do all that YouTube stuff. Like this video, subscribe, and slap that bell around, because bananas are yellow. Get more survival goodness and help support the show. Visit itrh.net to become part of the Roving Horde Armada. It's members just like you who really do help keep the lights on. Again, visit itrh.net. itrh.net. With that, we wrap up episode number 279 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.